The rain hammers against the bulletproof windows of the Miami-Dade County Courthouse like 1,000 angry fists. Inside courtroom 7, a young man stands in shackles, his Armani suit torn and blood-stained, his handsome Korean features bearing the marks of a life lived between two worlds. Across from him, seated on the highest bench, wearing the black robes of absolute judicial authority, sits the Honorable Choi Jin-ho, one of the most respected Korean-American judges in the state of Florida. The young man is accused of attempted murder. The victim? The very judge who now holds his life in his hands. But here is where this story becomes something far more devastating than a simple criminal trial. Judge Choi Jin-ho is his father, and the father has no idea he is about to sentence his own son to death. This is the story of a love so forbidden, so dangerous, so utterly impossible that it spans continents, generations, and the deepest wounds a family can inflict. It is the story of Choi Hyun-roy, a man caught between the criminal underworld that raised him and the legitimate world that rejected him before he was even born. It is the story of Chloe Bradley, a brilliant Black American attorney who sees past the chains and the charges to the broken soul beneath. And it is the story of how love, true love, can either redeem us or destroy everything we hold dear. What would you do if the person who made your heart beat for the first time came from a world your family taught you to despise? What if loving them meant betraying the only parent who ever believed in you? And what if the only way to save the man you love was to expose a secret so devastating it would tear apart one of the most powerful Korean families in America? Before we dive into this extraordinary journey through the neon-lit streets of Miami, through the hidden world of Korean organized crime in Florida, through a love story that defies every boundary society has constructed, I need to ask you something. If stories like this move you, if you believe that love is stronger than hatred, stronger than prejudice, stronger than the sins of our fathers, then please take just one moment to subscribe to this channel. Hit that notification bell so you never miss another story that will touch your soul. Share this video with someone who needs to believe that redemption is possible, that love can conquer all. Your support helps this community grow, and together, we can celebrate the stories that remind us what it means to be human. Now, let us travel back 30 years to a Florida that was just beginning to see the rise of Korean immigration, where fortunes were being made and empires were being built in the shadows. This is where our tragedy begins. Choi Jin-ho arrived in Miami in 1985 with nothing but a law degree from Seoul National University and a burning ambition to become somebody. Back in Korea, he had been the son of a minor government official, comfortable but unremarkable. In America, he saw the opportunity to become extraordinary, and extraordinary he became. Within 5 years of passing the Florida bar exam, Jin-ho had established himself as the go-to attorney for the growing Korean business community in South Florida. He understood both worlds, the American legal system and the Korean way of doing things. He could navigate the complex waters between them. His client list grew. His reputation spread. And his philosophy? The philosophy that would one day destroy his family, crystallized into an unshakable conviction. Jin-ho believed with every fiber of his being that character was inherited, that good families produced good people, and bad families produced criminals. It was not a matter of choice or circumstance. It was blood. It was genetics. It was fate, written before birth. This belief served him well as he climbed the ladder of success. It explained why he deserved his achievements while others languished in poverty. It justified his growing contempt for those who failed to rise as he had risen. And when he was appointed to the federal bench at the remarkably young age of 42, becoming one of the first Korean-American federal judges in Florida history, it confirmed everything he had always believed about himself. Judge Choi Jin-ho was a good man from a good family. His success was inevitable. His righteousness was unquestionable. And then Oh Min-jae walked into his courtroom. Min-jae was everything Jin-ho despised, a second-generation Korean American whose father had been a small-time criminal, whose mother had abandoned him, whose entire existence seemed to validate Jin-ho's theories about hereditary character. Min-jae had been arrested for assault, accused of beating a man nearly to death outside a Koreatown gambling den. The evidence was circumstantial at best. The victim, himself a known criminal, had changed his story 3 times. Witnesses were unreliable, their testimonies contradictory. A fair-minded judge might have seen reasonable doubt. A compassionate judge might have considered Min-jae's difficult upbringing, his lack of opportunities, the systemic forces that had shaped his life. But Jin-ho saw only what he expected to see: a criminal's son behaving as criminals behave. The verdict was never in doubt: guilty. As Min-jae was led away in chains, he turned to look at the judge who had just condemned him. Their eyes met across the courtroom, and something passed between them. Not merely anger, not simply resentment. Something darker, something patient, something that would wait years if necessary to achieve its terrible purpose. Jin-ho dismissed the look as the impotent rage of a defeated criminal. He went home that night to his beautiful house in Coral Gables, kissed his pregnant wife Yoon-ju, and slept the peaceful sleep of the righteous. He had no idea that he had just set in motion the destruction of everything he loved. Yoon-ju was the perfect wife for an ambitious Korean-American judge. Elegant, cultured, educated at Oha Women's University in Seoul before immigrating to join her husband. She managed their social calendar with precision, hosted dinner parties that advanced Jin-ho's career, and maintained the facade of domestic harmony that his position required. But beneath her polished exterior, Yoon-ju was lonely. Jin-ho's ambition left little room for intimacy. His long hours at the courthouse, his obsession with his legacy, his fundamental inability to see her as anything other than an accessory to his success, all of it had slowly eroded the love she once felt for him. She stayed because Korean wives stayed. She stayed because divorce would shame her family. She stayed because she was pregnant with their first child, and she hoped, desperately hoped, that fatherhood might soften her husband's rigid heart. She was 7 months pregnant when Oh Min-jae escaped from the county jail. The details of his escape were never fully explained. A guard was found unconscious. A door that should have been locked was open. Security cameras malfunctioned at precisely the wrong moment. Min-jae simply vanished, as if the prison had opened its mouth and exhaled him into the Florida night. The police assured Jin-ho that Min-jae would be recaptured within days. A escaped convict with no resources, no connections. No support network could not evade justice for long. Jin-ho nodded and agreed, and privately hired additional security for his home. He was not afraid. Men like him did not fear men like Min-jae, but he was cautious, always cautious. His caution was not enough. Yoon-ju was returning from a doctor's appointment, her driver navigating the palm-lined streets of Coral Gables, when the black SUV appeared from nowhere. It happened so fast. One moment she was gazing out the window at the afternoon sunshine. The next moment the car was surrounded. The driver was unconscious, and rough hands were pulling her from the vehicle. She screamed. She fought. But she was 7 months pregnant and no match for the men who held her. A hood was pulled over her head. She was thrown into the back of a van, and as the vehicle sped away, Yoon-ju heard a voice she would never forget. "This is what your husband deserves. This is justice." Oh Min-jae had his revenge. The kidnapping made national news. A federal judge's pregnant wife, snatched in broad daylight from one of Miami's most exclusive neighborhoods. The FBI was called in. Roadblocks were established. Every law enforcement resource in Florida was mobilized. And Jin-ho? Jin-ho went mad with fear and fury. He did not eat. He did not sleep. He paced the floors of his beautiful house like a caged tiger, alternating between desperate prayers for his wife's safety and elaborate fantasies of what he would do to Min-jae when he was caught. Days passed, then weeks. No ransom demand came, no communication of any kind. It was as if Yunju had been swallowed by the earth itself. And then, just as suddenly as she had disappeared, Yunju returned. A fisherman found her wandering along a deserted stretch of beach near Key West, disoriented and dehydrated but alive. She was rushed to the hospital, where doctors confirmed that both she and the baby were healthy. It was a miracle. A genuine miracle. But when Jin-ho arrived at the hospital, when he took his wife in his arms and wept with relief, something was already wrong. He could feel it in the way she stiffened at his touch. He could see it in the way her eyes refused to meet his. And when he asked her what had happened, what Minjai had done to her during those 3 weeks of captivity, she began to cry and could not stop. She would not tell him. She would only say that Minjai had released her. That one day, without explanation, he had simply let her go. No ransom paid. No conditions met. Freedom granted without any apparent reason. And in Jin-ho's mind, trained to see patterns, trained to construct narratives of guilt and innocence, a terrible question began to form. Why? Why would a man so consumed by hatred simply release his greatest weapon against his enemy? Why would a criminal pass up the opportunity to extract money, to make demands, to humiliate the judge who had condemned him? Unless he had already gotten what he wanted. The doubt entered Jin-ho's heart like a splinter, small at first, but impossible to ignore. He watched his wife more closely. He noted how she flinched when he touched her. He observed how she cried in the night when she thought he was asleep, and he interpreted everything through the lens of his suspicion. Yunju sensed the change in her husband immediately. The warmth that had briefly returned during her rescue cooled into something distant and examining. His questions became interrogations. His glances became inspections. He never accused her directly. He never spoke his suspicion aloud. But his silence was more damning than any accusation could be. She tried to reassure him. She swore on her parents' graves that Minjai had never touched her. She explained that he had kept her in a small room, fed her adequately, but never harmed her physically. He had wanted only to make Jin-ho suffer, to make him feel the helplessness of not knowing. That was his revenge, the psychological torture of uncertainty. But Jin-ho could not believe her. His philosophy would not allow it. If criminals were born and not made, then criminal behavior was inevitable. Minjai, a criminal by blood, would have acted as criminals act. The opportunity was there. The motive was there. The conclusion was inescapable. And then the baby was born. A boy, healthy and strong, with a lusty cry and grasping fingers. The nurses placed him in Jin-ho's arms, and the judge looked down at his son for the first time. He searched the infant's face for his own features. He examined the shape of the eyes, the curve of the nose, the set of the chin. And he found nothing that definitively proved the child was his. Nothing that could dispel the suspicion that had taken root in his heart. It was not rational. It was not fair. Newborns rarely resemble either parent strongly. But Jin-ho was beyond rationality now. He was trapped in a prison of his own making, constructed from his rigid beliefs and reinforced by his wounded pride. 3 weeks after the birth, on a night when the Florida humidity hung thick as a blanket over Miami, Jin-ho made the decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He told Unju to leave. She fell to her knees on the Italian marble floor of their living room. She clutched at his legs, her beautiful face contorted with desperation. She begged him to believe her. She invoked every sacred bond between them. She reminded him of their wedding vows, of the years they had built together, of the family name they shared. But Jin-ho had turned to stone. His face was a mask of cold determination. He had made his judgment, and he would not be moved. Yunju had one final argument to make. If he truly believed the child was not his, she said, there were tests. Medical tests that could prove paternity beyond any doubt. They could settle the question scientifically, definitively, forever. Jin-ho refused. He refused because he did not want proof. He wanted certainty, but he wanted his own certainty, the certainty that came from his philosophy, his worldview, his unshakable belief in his own rightness. A test might prove him wrong, and being proven wrong was something Choi Jin-ho could not tolerate. So Yoonju gathered what little she could carry. She wrapped her infant son in a blanket against the warm Florida night, and she walked out of the beautiful house in Coral Gables, away from the life she had built, into an uncertain future with nothing but the clothes on her back and a baby who would grow up never knowing his father. She named the boy Hyun Roy. It means virtuous and beautiful. And, in naming him thus, she was making a declaration of faith. Her son would not be defined by suspicion. He would not be limited by the circumstances of his birth. He would be virtuous and beautiful because she would raise him to be virtuous and beautiful, no matter what the world believed. But the world is not kind to disgraced women. And Miami, in the 1990s, was not kind to Korean immigrants who had fallen from grace. Yoonju made her way to a small apartment in the working-class neighborhood of Hialeah, as far from Coral Gables as one could get while remaining in the same city. The Korean community that had once celebrated her as the judge's wife now turned its back on her. The whispers followed everywhere she went. What had she done to deserve expulsion from her husband's house? Where there was smoke, there must be fire. A respectable woman would never find herself in such circumstances. She took whatever work she could find: cleaning houses, working in the back rooms of Korean restaurants, sewing alterations late into the night. Her delicate hands, once manicured and adorned with diamonds, grew rough and calloused. Her elegant posture, perfected through years of deportment training, bent under the weight of labor and sorrow. But she never complained. She never spoke ill of Jin-ho, even to her son. She simply endured, with a quiet dignity that would shape Hyun Roy more profoundly than any lesson she could have taught him. Little Hyun Roy grew up in that cramped apartment in Hialeah, surrounded by his mother's love but acutely aware of their poverty. He wore second-hand clothes. He ate whatever food his mother could afford. He watched her come home exhausted every night, her eyes red from strain, her body bent with fatigue, and even as a small child, he understood that something was deeply unfair about their situation. He asked about his father once, just once. Yoonju took his small hands in hers, looked into his eyes, and told him that his father was a man who had made a mistake, a man who had believed a lie about her and about him, a man who was not evil, but who had been unable to see past his own limitations. She did not speak with bitterness. She did not speak with anger. She spoke with a sadness so profound that even as a 5-year-old, Hyun Roy understood that this was a wound that would never fully heal. He never asked again. Instead, he channeled his questions into action. He studied hard in school, determined to lift his mother out of poverty. Dios, he took jobs as soon as he was old enough, delivering newspapers, mowing lawns, doing whatever he could to contribute to their household. He was, by every measure, a good boy, a virtuous boy, a beautiful soul shaped by hardship into something resilient and true. And then, when Hyun Roy was 11 years old, Oh Min-jae found him. The man appeared at the apartment one evening when Yoonju was working late. Hyun Roy answered the door to find a stranger with hard eyes and a knowing smile. "I know who you are," Min-jae said. "I know who your father is. And I know what he did to your mother." The boy should have closed the door. He should have called for help. But something in Min-jae's words struck a chord. This man knew his father. This man knew the truth. After years of questions and silence, here was someone who could provide answers. Gin Min-jae was clever. He did not try to corrupt Hyun Roy all at once. He came by occasionally at first, always when Eunju was away, always with small gifts, always with stories about the great Choi Jin-ho and his hypocrisy. He painted a picture of a world where the rich and powerful played by different rules, where men like Jin-ho destroyed innocent lives without consequence, where the only justice was the justice you took for yourself. Slowly, imperceptibly, the poison entered Hyun Roy's heart. Yoonju discovered what was happening when Hyun Roy was 14. She came home early one day to find Minjai sitting in her living room, her son hanging on his every word. The confrontation that followed was explosive. Yoonju screamed at Minjai to stay away from her son. She threatened to call the police. She revealed, for the first time, on the full extent of what Minjai had done, how his kidnapping had destroyed her marriage, how his revenge had condemned her and her innocent child to a life of poverty and shame. Minjai laughed. "I gave you back," he said. "I could have done anything. But I let you go. Everything that happened afterward was your husband's choice. Blame him." He left that night, but the damage was done. Hyun Roy had seen his mother's desperation. He had seen the fear in her eyes. And he had begun to understand, truly understand, the magnitude of the injustice that had been committed against them. The years that followed were a battle for Hyun Roy's soul. Yoonju fought to keep him on the right path, emphasizing education, hard work, legitimate success. But Minjai was always there in the shadows, offering an alternative: money, power, respect. All the things that had been denied to Hyun Roy because of his father's cruelty. By the time he was 16, Hyun Roy was living two lives. By day, he was an honor student, quiet and hardworking, his mother's pride and joy. By night, he was learning the ways of the Korean criminal underworld, running small errands for Minjai's organization, discovering that he had a talent for violence that frightened and thrilled him in equal measure. Yoonju saw her son slipping away and was powerless to stop it. She worked even harder, hoping that if she could just save enough money, she could send him to college, get him away from Miami, give him a chance at a different life. But her health was failing. Years of back-breaking labor had taken their toll. The cough that started as an annoyance became something more sinister. The doctor's diagnosis, delivered in a cold examination room in a free clinic, was a death sentence. Late-stage lung cancer, 6 months to live. Yoonju did not tell her son. She could not bear to see him suffer. Instead, she wrote him a letter. A letter explaining everything. The truth about his father. The truth about Minjai. The truth about her love for him. A love so vast and unconditional that it would survive even death. She hid the letter in the lining of her old coat, the one possession she had kept from her former life, and she continued working until she could work no more. Hyun Roy was 19 when his mother died. He held her hand in the hospital as the machines beeped their final alarms, watched the light fade from her eyes, and felt something inside him break irreparably. The only person who had ever truly loved him was gone. The only anchor holding him to the world of light and goodness had been cut. He found the letter 2 weeks later, while sorting through her meager possessions. And as he read her words, as he finally understood the full truth of his history, a cold fury settled over him like a second skin. His father had done this. Choi Jin-ho, the great judge, the pillar of the community, had condemned an innocent woman and her child to poverty and suffering. He had never once tried to find them. He had never once questioned his own judgment. He had simply moved on with his life, remarried, built a new family, achieved even greater success, while Eunju worked herself to death in obscurity. Hyun Roy made a decision that night. He would have his revenge, not for himself, but for his mother. He would make Choi Jin-ho suffer as she had suffered. He would destroy the judge's comfortable life, his sterling reputation, his smug certainty, and he would use the very skills Minjai had taught him to do it. But fate, that capricious author of all our stories, had other plans. Because before Hyun Roy could execute his revenge, he met her, Chloe Bradley. The memory of that first meeting would stay with him forever, seared into his consciousness like a brand. It was a sweltering Miami afternoon, the kind of day when the humidity makes breathing feel like drowning. Hyun Roy was in Little Haiti, conducting business for Minjai, when he saw a commotion across the street. A group of young men, clearly looking for trouble, had surrounded a woman outside a community center. She was black, tall and striking, ears with natural hair that crowned her head like a halo, and eyes that flashed with defiance rather than fear. She was holding a stack of legal files, clearly some kind of lawyer or advocate, and she was refusing to back down despite being outnumbered 5-1. I said, Hyunroy heard her say, her voice carrying across the street, that Mrs. Johnson is not going to be evicted. I don't care how many of you the landlord sends. She has rights. One of the men stepped closer, his posture threatening. And what are you going to do about it? The woman smiled. A dangerous, beautiful smile. I'm going to make sure that by this time next week, your boss is facing federal charges for housing discrimination, tenant harassment, and whatever else I can make stick. I graduated top of my class from Harvard Law. You really want to test me? Something about her fearlessness, her absolute refusal to be intimidated, struck Hyunroy like lightning. Before he knew what he was doing, he was crossing the street, his presence causing the men to scatter. They recognized him. In certain circles of Miami, everyone knew who worked for Min-jae. The woman turned to look at him, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. She saw a young Korean man with hard eyes and an expensive suit, clearly dangerous, clearly criminal. He saw a black woman with the bearing of a queen and the fire of a warrior. I didn't need your help, she said finally. I know, he replied, but I wanted to give it anyway. And somehow, impossibly, she smiled. Her name was Chloe Bradley, and she was everything Hyunroy was not. She came from a good family in Chicago, the daughter of a pastor and a schoolteacher who had raised her to believe in justice, in compassion, in the fundamental goodness of human beings. She had fought her way to Harvard on scholarships and determination, graduated with honors, and turned down lucrative offers from corporate firms to work in public interest law. She was in Miami on a fellowship, providing legal services to immigrant communities facing exploitation. The Korean community was part of her portfolio, which was how she had first heard whispers about the young man called Hyun Roy, the orphan who worked for the most dangerous crime boss in Koreatown. By all logic, she should have avoided him. He was everything she had been taught to oppose. He represented the darkness that she had dedicated her life to fighting. But love does not follow logic. They began meeting in secret, coffee at first, in little Cuban cafes far from the eyes of anyone who might recognize them. Then dinners, then long walks along the beach at night, talking about everything and nothing, discovering that beneath their surface differences lay a profound connection. She told him about her dreams of changing the world, one case at a time. He told her about his mother, about the injustice that had shaped his life, about the rage that burned constantly in his chest. She did not judge him. She did not try to fix him. She simply listened, her brown eyes soft with understanding. "You're not what they made you," she told him one night, the moonlight turning the ocean to silver behind them. "You're not your father's rejection or Min-jae's training. You're what you choose to be. Every day, every moment. You can choose differently." No one had ever spoken to him like that. No one had ever looked at him and seen possibility instead of inevitability. No one had ever believed he could be anything other than what circumstance had made him. He fell in love with her, helplessly, completely. The kind of love that remakes a person from the inside out. And she, despite every warning bell in her educated mind, fell in love with him too. For 6 months, they existed in their own secret world. He began to pull away from Min-jae's organization, taking fewer jobs, asking fewer questions. She started to imagine a future together, against all odds, against all reason. They talked about running away, starting over somewhere new, leaving behind the darkness that surrounded him and building something clean and good. But the past is not so easily escaped. And Hyunroy's past was about to catch up with him in the most devastating way imaginable. Min-jae had been watching. Min-jae was always watching. And he did not like what he saw. The young man he had spent years cultivating, the weapon he had carefully forged for his own purposes, was slipping away. And worse, He was slipping away because of a woman, a Black American woman who represented everything Min Jae despised about the legitimate world. The confrontation came on a night thick with tension, the air before a storm. Min Jae summoned Hyun Roy to his compound in Homestead, far from the city lights, in the agricultural hinterlands where bodies could disappear without trace. "You think I don't know?" Min Jae asked, his voice soft with menace. "You think I don't see what that woman is doing to you?" Hyun Roy said nothing. His face was stone, but his heart was racing. "I saved you," Min Jae continued. "When your father threw you away, when the world turned its back on you, I was the one who gave you purpose. I was the one who taught you to be strong. And this is how you repay me? By whoring yourself to some American lawyer?" The word whoring ignited something in Hyun Roy. Before he could stop himself, he had crossed the room and had Min Jae by the throat. "Never," he growled, "speak about her like that again." For a long moment the two men stared at each other. Then Min Jae laughed, a cold sound that echoed off the walls. "There he is," Min Jae said. "The killer I raised. You can pretend all you want, but this is who you are. This is what I made you. And if you try to leave, if you try to run away with your little girlfriend, I will destroy everything you love, starting with her." It was not an idle threat. Hyun Roy knew Min Jae well enough to understand that. The organization had reach. The organization had resources. If Min Jae decided to hurt Chloe, there was very little Hyun Roy could do to stop him. But there was one thing he could do. One decisive action that would free him from Min Jae's control forever. The details of what happened that night would later be debated in courtrooms and newspapers. What is certain is this: Hyun Roy went to Min Jae's compound as a lieutenant in his organization. He left as a murderer. He killed Min Jae with his bare hands. It was not quick. It was not clean. Years of rage, years of manipulation, years of being used as a weapon against his own father, all of it exploded in a moment of terrible violence. When it was over, Hyun Roy stood in the wreckage of his former life, blood on his hands and freedom in his grasp. But freedom, he was about to discover, came with its own price. With Min Jae dead, the truth about Hyun Roy's parentage emerged. Organization members talked, records surfaced. Within weeks, everyone in Miami's Korean community knew the secret that had been buried for 25 years. Hyun Roy was the abandoned son of Judge Choi Jin-ho. The scandal was enormous. A federal judge, known for his harsh sentences and his rhetoric about family values, had thrown out his own child based on unproven suspicion. The press descended like vultures. Jin-ho's career, his reputation, his carefully constructed image of righteousness, all of it began to crumble. And Hyun Roy? Hyun Roy felt nothing but cold satisfaction. This was what he had wanted. This was his mother's vindication. Let the great judge suffer as she had suffered. Let him taste the poverty of spirit that he had inflicted on others. But Chloe saw it differently. "Revenge isn't justice," she told him, her voice heavy with disappointment. "Destroying him doesn't bring your mother back. It doesn't heal what was broken. It just makes you into the thing he always believed you were." They fought. The worst fight of their relationship. She accused him of becoming everything she opposed. He accused her of not understanding, of being too privileged to comprehend true suffering. Words were spoken that could not be taken back. She left. And Hyun Roy, alone with his victory, discovered that vengeance tasted like ashes. The weeks that followed were the darkest of his life. Without Chloe, without purpose, and without even the structure of Min Jae's organization, he drifted. He drank. He picked fights in bars. He was, for the first time, exactly what his father had always believed him to be: a criminal, a waste, a man defined by the worst of his circumstances. It was during this spiral that he learned Jin-ho was preparing to retire from the bench. The judge was hosting a farewell gala, a celebration of his decades of service. The great and good of Miami would be there, celebrating a man whose hands were far dirtier than anyone knew. Something snapped in Hyun Roy. The retirement was too much. The celebration was too much. The idea that Jin-ho would ride off into a comfortable sunset while his mother lay in an unmarked grave was more than he could bear. He obtained a gun, he put on his finest suit, and he went to the gala to kill his father. The ballroom of the Biltmore Hotel was a glittering wonderland, chandeliers casting rainbows across the assembled crowd. Hyun-roy moved through the room like a ghost, unseen and unremarked, his hand wrapped around the pistol in his pocket. He saw Jin-ho standing at the center of a group of admirers, accepting their praise with false modesty, the picture of a successful man enjoying the fruits of his labors. And Hyun-roy raised his weapon. But he hesitated. For just one moment, he hesitated. And in that moment, someone tackled him from behind. The gun discharged harmlessly into the ceiling. Chaos erupted. And when the dust settled, Hyun-roy found himself in handcuffs, staring up at the face of Choi Jin-ho. Father and son looked at each other for the first time since Hyun-roy was an infant. Neither spoke, but in the judge's eyes, Hyun-roy saw something unexpected. Not anger, not fear. Recognition. Jin-ho knew. In that moment, looking at the young man who had just tried to kill him, Judge Choi Jin-ho finally saw the truth he had spent 25 years denying. This was his son, his flesh and blood. The child he had condemned before he could even walk. The trial that followed became a national sensation. A federal judge's abandoned son, raised by criminals, attempts to assassinate his own father. Every cable news network covered it. Every newspaper ran think pieces about nature versus nurture, about the sins of fathers, about the failures of the justice system. And the attorney who stepped forward to defend Hyun-roy? Chloe Bradley. She had followed the news. She had watched the coverage. And despite everything that had happened between them, despite every reason she had to walk away, she could not abandon him. Not when she knew the truth. Not when she understood the forces that had shaped him. Not when she still loved him. The courtroom was packed on the first day of the trial. Hyun-roy sat at the defense table, thin and pale from months in custody, but his eyes lit up when Chloe entered. She met his gaze for just a moment, a world of meaning passing between them, before turning to face the judge. Not Jin-ho. He had recused himself, obviously, but the judge who presided was a colleague, a man who had known Jin-ho for decades, a man who would be hard to convince. Chloe had built her entire case on one argument: Hyun-roy was not responsible for his actions because he had been systematically shaped by circumstances beyond his control, his father's rejection, his mother's suffering, Min-jae's manipulation. Every step of his journey toward that ballroom with a gun in his hand had been determined by forces he did not choose and could not escape. It was a radical defense. It challenged the very foundations of criminal responsibility. And it forced everyone in that courtroom to confront an uncomfortable question. If we create our criminals through neglect and injustice, can we then condemn them for becoming what we made them? The prosecution was ruthless. They painted Hyun-roy as a cold-blooded killer, a man who had chosen violence at every turn, a man who had murdered Min-jae and attempted to murder Jin-ho without remorse. They brought in witnesses who testified to his crimes within the organization. They showed evidence of the planning that went into the assassination attempt. But Chloe was relentless. She called experts who testified about childhood trauma and its effects on brain development. She called social workers who described the systemic failures that had allowed Min-jae to prey on vulnerable youth. She called former members of Jin-ho's staff who revealed how the judge had actively blocked any attempt to find or help his abandoned son. And finally, she called Jin-ho himself to the stand. The courtroom fell silent as the former judge made his way to the witness box. He looked older than his years, the weight of scandal having aged him visibly. He sat down, was sworn in, and looked at the woman who was about to cross-examine him. "Judge Choi," Chloe began, her voice steady. "Did you, 25 years ago, force your wife and newborn son out of your home?" Jin-ho hesitated. "I believed, at the time, that the child was not mine. Did you have any proof of that belief?" I had. Circumstances. Circumstances, Chloe repeated. You mean the fact that your wife had been kidnapped by Oh Minjai? Yes. The same Oh Minjai whom you had convicted on questionable evidence based largely on his family background? Another hesitation. The evidence was sufficient. Chloe smiled, a dangerous smile that those who knew her had learned to fear. Your Honor, I'd like to introduce into evidence the original trial transcripts from the Minjay case. The documents painted a damning picture. Witnesses whose stories contradicted each other. Evidence that had been handled improperly. A verdict that seemed predetermined before the first argument was made. Judge Choi, Chloe continued, isn't it true that you convicted Oh Minjai not because of the evidence, but because of who his parents were? Objection, the prosecutor called. Relevance. It goes to the heart of this case, Chloe argued. This trial isn't just about Choi Hyun-roy. It's about a system that creates criminals and then condemns them for becoming what it made them. Judge Choi's philosophy, his belief that criminality is inherited, is directly responsible for everything that happened. His unjust conviction of Min Jae led to the kidnapping. The kidnapping led to his rejection of his wife and son. The rejection led to Hyun-roy's upbringing in poverty and his eventual recruitment by Min Jae. Every link in this chain can be traced back to one man's prejudice. The judge presiding considered for a long moment. I'll allow it. And so Chloe continued, we're methodically dismantling Jin-ho's credibility, his philosophy, his entire worldview. She forced him to confront the consequences of his actions. She made him admit, publicly, that he had never once attempted to verify his suspicions about his wife, that he had never once looked for his son, that he had known, deep down, that he might be wrong, but had chosen pride over truth. By the time she was finished, Jin-ho was a broken man. Tears streamed down his face as he finally said the words he had denied for a quarter century. I was wrong. I was wrong about everything. My wife was faithful. My son was innocent. And I destroyed them both, because I was too proud to admit I might be mistaken. The courtroom sat in stunned silence. But Chloe was not finished. She turned to address the jury directly. Han, you have heard the prosecution argue that Choi Hyun-roy is responsible for his choices, she said, and in a narrow, legal sense, they are correct. He did pull the trigger. He did intend to kill. But I ask you to consider a broader truth. She began to pace, her voice rising with passion. This man was thrown away before he was a month old. His mother, innocent of any wrongdoing, was cast into poverty by a husband who valued his pride more than the truth. She worked herself to death trying to provide for her son, and when she died, he was alone. Completely alone. No family, no support. No one to show him a different path. She paused, letting the words sink in. And then, Oh Min-jae found him. A criminal who had been created by Judge Choi's own unjust verdict. A man with nothing to offer but rage and the skills of survival. Is it any wonder that Hyun-roy became what he became? Is it any wonder that a boy abandoned by justice would grow up to reject it? Chloe turned to look at Hyun-roy, and their eyes met across the courtroom. I am not asking you to excuse what he did, she continued, her voice softening. I am asking you to understand how he came to do it. I am asking you to recognize that crime does not emerge from a vacuum, that every criminal has a story, and that, until we address the injustices that create them, we will never truly be safe. She took a breath. The prosecution wants you to believe in a simple world where there are good people and bad people, and all we need to do is punish the bad ones. But the truth is more complicated. The truth is that we are all capable of darkness when pushed far enough. The truth is that the line between victim and villain is often drawn by circumstance rather than character. The truth is that Choi Hyun-roy, this man you are being asked to condemn, never had a chance. Her voice broke slightly. Until someone gave him one. Until someone looked at him and saw not a criminal, not a lost cause, not the inevitable product of bad blood, but a human being worthy of love and capable of redemption. She turned back to the jury. That is what I am asking you to do today. Not to free a guilty man, but to recognize that guilt is not the whole story. To acknowledge that justice must include mercy. And to remember that every person in this room is only a few bad circumstances away from standing where he stands now. The closing argument lasted another hour, but Chloe's words had already done their work. And when the jury retired to deliberate, the courtroom buzzed with the electricity of something momentous. They returned in 4 hours. The verdict: guilty of attempted murder, but with a recommendation for leniency based on mitigating circumstances. The sentence: 10 years, with possibility of parole in 3. It was not freedom, but it was not death. And in the context of what Hyun-roy had done, it was something like mercy. As the bailiffs came to take him away, Hyun-roy looked at Chloe one last time. "Thank you," he mouthed. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. And then, unexpectedly, another figure approached the defense table. Jin-ho, looking older and more broken than any of them had ever seen him. He stopped in front of his son. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Then Jin-ho did something no one in that courtroom expected. He bowed. A deep, formal bow of apology, the kind reserved in Korean culture for the most profound expressions of regret. "I am sorry," he said, his voice cracking. "I am sorry I was not your father. I am sorry I let my pride destroy our family. I am sorry I never looked for you, never gave you a chance, never tried to see who you really were." Hyun-roy stood frozen. This was the moment he had imagined 1,000 times. The moment when his father would finally acknowledge him, finally admit fault, finally see him as a person rather than a problem. But now that it was here, he felt only emptiness. Too much time had passed. Too much damage had been done. An apology, however sincere, could not resurrect his mother, could not give him back the childhood he had lost, and could not erase the scars that covered his heart. "I don't forgive you," he said quietly. "I may never forgive you. But I am tired of carrying this rage. I am tired of letting what you did define who I am." He paused, looking at his father with something almost like pity. Maybe that's the beginning. Maybe that's all we can do. Let go of the anger and see what remains. The bailiffs led him away then, through the side door, into the prison system where he would spend the next several years. But as he walked, he turned one last time to look at Chloe. "Wait for me," his eyes said. "Always," hers replied. 3 years later, on a morning bright with Florida sunshine, Choi Hyun-roy walked out of the correctional facility in Starka, a free man. He had served his sentence. He had completed every rehabilitation program offered. He had become, against all expectations, a model prisoner. But none of that mattered as much as what waited for him at the gate. Chloe stood beside a rental car, her natural hair glowing in the sunlight, her smile the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. She had visited him every week. She had written him every day. She had built a life preparing for this moment, for the day when they could finally begin again. He walked toward her slowly, savoring every step of freedom, every breath of air that was not filtered through prison walls. They did not speak when he reached her. Words were inadequate for what passed between them. Instead, he took her in his arms and held her like he would never let go, held her while the tears he had refused to shed for 3 years finally fell. "I love you," he whispered into her hair. "I have always loved you. I will always love you." "I know," she said. "I've been waiting." They drove away from the prison together, toward a future that was uncertain but full of possibility. Behind them lay decades of pain, of injustice, of choices made and consequences suffered. But ahead lay something new. Hyun-roy had enrolled in correspondence courses during his imprisonment. He had discovered a talent for counseling, for reaching young men who stood where he had once stood, at the crossroads between destruction and redemption. Chloe had helped him apply to programs that placed former offenders in community service roles. There was work to be done. There were lives to be saved. There were young men and women growing up in poverty and neglect, who needed someone to show them a different path. And there was love. After everything, through everything, there was still love. 6 months later, on a beach at sunset, Hyun-roy asked Chloe to marry him. She said yes before he finished the question. The wedding was small, held in a community center in Little Haiti, where Chloe had once defended a woman from eviction. The guests were an unlikely mix: Korean-American community members who had come to respect Hyun-roy's transformation, Black and Latino activists from Chloe's network, former prisoners who had found their way thanks to Hyun-roy's mentorship. And in the back, sitting alone, watching with tears in his eyes, was Choi Jin-ho. He had not been invited, but he had come anyway, needing to witness this moment, this evidence that his son had found happiness despite everything. Hyun-roy saw him as he walked down the aisle with his bride. For a long moment their eyes met, and then Hyun-roy nodded. Once. A small gesture, barely perceptible, but Jin-ho understood. It was not forgiveness. That might never come, but it was acknowledgement. It was the beginning of a path that might, someday, lead somewhere better. After the ceremony, as the guests celebrated with food and music and dancing, Jin-ho approached his son. "I know I have no right to ask anything of you," he said, "but I am dying. The doctors give me less than a year. And before I go, I want you to know that I have changed my will. Everything I have, everything I built, it will go to you and your wife. Use it to help others. Use it to build what I was too blind to build." Hyun-roy looked at his father for a long time. The anger was still there, would perhaps always be there. But it was no longer the defining feature of his emotional landscape. "None, I don't want your money," he said finally. "I don't want your legacy. What I want is something you can never give me. 25 years with my mother. A childhood with a father who loved me. A life that was not shaped by your cruelty." He paused. "But Chloe has taught me something. She has taught me that holding on to anger is like drinking poison and hoping the other person dies. I cannot change the past. I can only choose what to do with the future." He looked at his wife, who was watching them from across the room, her face full of love and concern. "We will accept your money," he continued, "but not for ourselves. We will use it to build something new. A foundation for children in circumstances like mine, kids who have been thrown away, forgotten, written off. We will show them that their stories do not have to end in tragedy. That redemption is possible. That love can heal what injustice has broken." Jin-ho wept. There, in front of everyone, the former judge who had prided himself on never showing weakness collapsed into tears. "Thank you," he managed to say. "Thank you for being better than I ever was." Hyun-roy did not embrace his father. That wound was still too fresh. But he placed a hand on Jin-ho's shoulder just for a moment. "Go in peace," he said. "I will not carry your guilt for you, but I will not add to it either. Whatever time you have left, spend it making what amends you can. That is all any of us can do." Jin-ho died 8 months later, peacefully, with a photograph of Hyun-roy's wedding beside his bed. He had spent his final months volunteering at legal aid clinics, offering his expertise to those who could not afford representation, trying to give back some small measure of what he had taken. It was not enough. It could never be enough. But it was something. At the funeral, Hyun-roy delivered the eulogy. He did not speak of love or grief or any of the conventional sentiments. Instead, he spoke about choices. "My father made terrible choices," he said. "Choices that hurt innocent people. Choices that shaped my life in ways I am still learning to overcome. But he also made different choices at the end. He chose to acknowledge his wrongs. He chose to try to make amends. He chose, finally, to see me as something other than a reflection of his fears." He looked out at the assembled mourners, many of them Koreans who had once celebrated Jin-ho's success. "We do not get to choose the hands we are dealt," he continued. "We do not get to choose our parents, our circumstances, and the forces that shape us in our earliest years. But we do get to choose what we do with those cards. We get to choose, every day, whether to perpetuate the cycle of pain or to break it, whether to hold on to anger or to let it go, whether to see others as categories or as human beings. He paused, feeling Chloe's hand in his. My father failed that choice for most of his life, but in the end, he chose differently. And because of that choice, because of his willingness to finally see me as his son rather than his shame, I am able to stand here today and say something I never thought I would say. His voice broke slightly. I hope he finds peace. I hope that wherever he is now, he knows that his legacy will not be the harm he caused, but the healing that will come from his final gifts. I hope he knows that his grandson, the child Chloe and I are expecting, will grow up knowing that redemption is possible, that no one is beyond saving, that love is stronger than hate. The funeral ended, the mourners dispersed, and Hyun Roy went home with his wife, to the house they had built together, to the life that stretched out before them full of challenges and possibilities. In the nursery they had prepared, he stood looking at the crib where his son would soon sleep. On the wall, he had hung a photograph of his mother, the only one he possessed, so that his child would know the woman who had sacrificed everything for love. I wish you could see this, Uma, he whispered. I wish you could know that your suffering was not in vain, that the virtuous and beautiful boy you raised found his way to this moment, that your grandson will never know the poverty and abandonment that defined my childhood. Chloe came to stand beside him, her hand resting on her swelling belly. She knows, Chloe said softly. Wherever she is, she knows. And she is proud of you. Hyun Roy turned to look at his wife. This woman who had crossed every boundary society constructed to love him. This Black American lawyer who had seen past the chains and the charges to the broken soul beneath. This extraordinary person who had believed in his redemption when everyone else, including himself, had given up. How did I get so lucky? He asked. Chloe smiled. Luck had nothing to do with it. You chose to be better. Every day, even when it was hard, even when it would have been easier to give in to the darkness, you chose to be better. And I chose to love you because I saw that choice. I saw the man you were becoming, not just the man you had been. She took his face in her hands. That is what love is, she said. Seeing the possibility in someone and helping them grow into it. Being patient when they fall and celebratory when they rise. Choosing, again and again, to build something together rather than tear each other apart. They stood there in the fading light, two people from different worlds, different cultures, different circumstances, united by something stronger than all the forces that had conspired to keep them apart. Outside, the sun set over Miami, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple. Somewhere in the city, young men and women stood at crossroads, making choices that would shape the rest of their lives. Some would choose darkness. Some would choose light. And some, the lucky few, would find someone who believed in them enough to show them that redemption was possible. This is the story of Choi Hyun Roy and Chloe Bradley, a story of abandonment and belonging, of vengeance and forgiveness, of two people who should never have found each other but somehow did, and in doing so, proved that love truly can conquer all. It is not a simple story. It is not a story where the good are rewarded and the wicked punished. It is a story that acknowledges the complexity of human nature, the way we are shaped by forces beyond our control, the struggle we all face to be better than our circumstances would make us. But at its heart, burning with a light that no darkness can extinguish, it is a love story. And love, as this story teaches us, art is the most powerful force in the universe. It can heal wounds that seemed permanent. It can bridge divides that seemed impassable. It can transform criminals into saints and saints into sinners. It can, if we let it, remake the world. So the next time you look at someone and see only their worst qualities, remember Choi Hyun Roy. Remember the abandoned boy who became a criminal. Remember the criminal who became a killer. And remember the killer who became a husband, a father, a healer of broken souls. Remember that redemption is always possible, that no one is beyond saving, that love, given freely and without condition, can work miracles that logic cannot explain. And perhaps, in your own life, you will find someone like Chloe, someone who sees not who you are, but who you could be. Someone who loves you not despite your flaws, but because they understand where those flaws came from. Someone who stands by you when the world condemns you and celebrates you when you finally break free. That kind of love is rare. That kind of love is precious. That kind of love is worth fighting for, worth waiting for, worth everything. If this story moved you, if it made you believe even a little bit more in the power of love to transform, then please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story that will touch your heart. And remember, always remember, that you are capable of redemption. No matter what you have done, no matter where you have been, no matter what voices in your head tell you that you are beyond saving, you are not. Love is waiting for you. Then it may be hiding in the most unexpected place. It may come from the most unexpected person. But it is there, patient and enduring, ready to remake you from the inside out. All you have to do is choose to let it in.